Are we on? Hi, everyone. It's so great to be back. And I'm super excited because I have two guests and who work with me. And I am by far and away the least educated person here with this group here. So it always makes me really happy because I love being surrounded by people who know subjects that like I am definitely not an expert in, but they definitely are. So Altovise recently joined us about a year ago now.
Yep, almost a year ago.
With a you'll talk about your background with a PhD and a master's in genetic counseling. Mm-hmm. And so, and then Robert Gentleman has been here for a long time, for 4 years, and is a PhD in, I don't even know, computational
statistics.
In statistics. Robert has the best background, anyways, has the most fascinating background, so I'll let him talk about it. But he has lots of famous software programs named after him. So I'll let everyone introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into our topic on diversity and why is it so important for us.
Hello, Facebook. I'm Altovise Ewing, and as Anne mentioned, I joined the team a little less than a year ago. I am trained as a genetic counselor as well as a health equity researcher. So a lot of my research to date has really focused on how do we ensure that the genetic and genomic technologies that are being developed are accessible to all populations. So how can we ensure that those resources do not contribute to these disparities in health outcomes that we see? So I'm really happy to be here. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, so I'm very grateful to be able to chat about it today.
Hi, I'm Robert Gentleman. I'm an academic, or was an academic statistician. I taught at a variety of universities, and then I left that profession to go to a company that made drugs because I was pretty interested in trying to understand how we could start to develop therapeutics, or how I could help work on the development of therapeutics. And I joined 23andMe 4 years ago to start to use human genetics as the basis for drug discovery. And so I, too, am very happy to be here today.
And Robert's missing out that for any of you out there who have used the statistical programming language called R, Robert developed it. It's pretty cool. Like, it's really
with lots of help.
With lots of help, but in certain crowds, every so often, you know, you get some celebrities, like you could have Gwyneth Paltrow there, and in some crowds we have Robert Gentleman, and people are like, oh my God, it's Robert, it's R! So I kind of love it. All right, we'll jump into the questions.
All right, let's get started. What does genetic diversity mean, and why is it important to research?
Is that for all of us? So it's one of the things from the earliest days, I'd say, was always a priority in this company, is that we wanted to look at everyone on the planet. You know, I think that understanding genetics broadly and understanding, in my mind, it was like this, you have this spectacular differences all throughout the world. And, you know, some people are amazing at statistics, some people are amazing at singing, some people can run really fast, some people can, or swim really fast, and some people, like, we look slightly different. And understanding the diversity and then also being able to apply that into research and making sure that it is applied, that you're studying all groups and all populations. And it was one thing that we realized in those early days, that it was mostly studied in a European population, and we have this ability to really, attract individuals of all populations that were interested in participating. And that there's a lot of power in drug discovery that we found by having a more diverse cohort, and understanding is that you do get certain diseases that happen to be more prevalent in certain populations. And so it's important for us to be able to understand the diversity of the human race and be able to look at diseases in all populations. And if you have more on that there.
Yeah, so I would add, and I'm sure that Robert will add more to this, that it is important for us to know even how some of those maybe therapeutic outcomes that are developed, how do those particular therapies operate in different populations? Mm-hmm. Are there certain genetic variations that may cause certain people, certain groups, to metabolize a drug a little bit quicker or a little bit slower? So are there any potential side effects that could stem from that? And then beyond that, I think it's also important for us to know, how do these various populations access the resources that are developed, and we'd really need to have representation from a lot of different groups, just to make sure that there is equity as an outcome.
And so for me, genetic diversity is about, the understanding that variation in your genome can have big impacts on the phenotype, on what you sort of display, whether it's hair color or eye color, skin color, risk for disease, ability to sing, etc. And so in trying to understand disease, we like to use the variability in the human genome as one of the mechanisms that says, oh, you have the people with a particular variant at this location have a higher than average risk of getting celiac disease. And that's great, but we really only get to study the experiments that nature did for us. And it turns out that in different populations, nature in some sense has done different experiments. Mm-hmm. And so if all we do is look at one population, say Europeans, then we're only going to see the variation that's in that population. We won't see variation that might be quite substantially different in other populations. And often it's that underlying difference in genetics that will give rise to the different frequencies of diseases. So sickle cell disease, for example, mm-hmm. right? And so if you don't have variation in that gene in your population, you can't study it in that population. Mm-hmm.
So, Altovise, this question is for you.
Okay.
Why is there a lack of diversity in research?
Okay. So we know that there are actually several reasons or several factors that contribute to a lack of diversity in research. A lot of people are aware of the unethical practices, such as the U.S. Public Health Service, the Tuskegee syphilis study. We also know of other egregious studies that have gone on to target underrepresented populations. But at the same time, there are other factors. We know that at times, healthcare biases may also influence the representation that we see from various populations in research. We also know that the lack of awareness or the lack of understanding of the various genetic protocols may also contribute to that representation. So it's a really complex question with a lot of different answers, but we can't really pinpoint one particular factor as being the main reason that we see this variation in representation.
And this question's for you. Mm-hmm. What is 23andMe doing to address this issue?
Well, I think there's a couple things. So, one of the main aspects that I saw that was an issue in healthcare equality is the access and the affordability. And so one of the first things, people always ask the question, why did you even bother with this direct to consumer? Just go through physicians. That's what everyone does. And, one of the main reasons why we've tried to lower the price and make it direct to consumer is to enable access. And I think that's what you can get in lots of different communities. And, there's all kinds of data now about, income inequality and, people are not, poor are getting poorer and poorer, rich are getting richer and richer. And so I think that there's a responsibility to look at alternative mechanisms for enabling access to healthcare. And I think one of the things that I love about 23andMe, and I've heard this from certain communities, is that people feel empowered. And we're also focused on prevention. And so it's really expensive once you have a disease. I was on a panel once on preterm labor, and I loved the woman I was with. She's like, if anyone had told me, the long-term consequences and the cost and all the other issues that come, I could have been more proactive. And I think that's part of where we think about, if there's anything I can do to help people prevent type 2 diabetes. Because once you're diabetic, it's a long road that's really expensive and really complicated. So I think it's one of the things that 23andMe we think about is really making sure that there's accessibility. It's, it's online. We're now in retail stores. It's easy for people to access. And, I think one of the things that we can do on the product side as well is make sure that our reports are applicable to all populations. Mm-hmm. And it's not equal yet, But it's one of those things, like the research team, we can like actually do that research, and we can try to make sure that we can validate all of our reports in all different populations. So I think that there's a lot that we can do. We do try to give away kits to certain populations to make sure that it's accessible. We're always open to ideas. I think it's really important for healthcare to be equitable and for people to be able to have access. And I really think a lot about, again, for certain populations, making sure that it is accessible, and especially because we focus on prevention. I think there's this whole wide world of like helping people long term in being able to prevent disease.
I think you did a really good job of touching on how as our it's core to our mission to help people access, understand, and benefit from their human genome, from that information. And I just love the way that we help people understand that information. We don't just dump it in their lap. We have resources available, whether it's encouraging people to visit their healthcare provider to talk about this information. We have websites dedicated specifically for various reports. And we also link people with support groups. So I just really like that this is a topic that terrifies a lot of people, and I think that we do a really good job of normalizing it and helping people realize that this is something that impacts me every day and something that I can talk about day in and day out.
And it's something I saw when I worked in healthcare. I was always a patient volunteer, and I'd work I worked at San Francisco General, and you'd see like how intimidating healthcare can be. And I think that there's actually issues of like, you get a lot of white coats and a lot of degrees that are like, frankly, just talking down and don't have the time to explain it. And I really believe every single person is capable of making changes in their life and understanding their information if you're just given the time and the resources to make those changes. And so you just like, it's not the fault of those individuals. Like, you just need to have that time. But I really believe it's a core value of the company. Like, we really believe in the potential of everyone to understand this information. And I think that's going to apply more broadly in healthcare. Like, I think you can understand it all.
And I think from a research perspective, there's also some differences between us and what a person who wanted to participate in research, in sort of classic research, might do, right? Often it focuses on people who are sick when they're in the hospital. It's a pretty intimidating time, and as Anne said, you can be sort of feeling like there's figures of authority around, and you don't really know how to respond. You're a subject. And the way that we do research is really web-based. It's sort of often more after the fact. We ask people about their experiences, etc. But it's really allows you to come in and pick the area that you want to work on. Right? If you're interested in this kind of research, then we basically will put surveys in front of you for that. And if you're not interested in other ones, then you don't have to participate in those. So I think part of the way that we can sort of help change things a little bit is to just provide stuff that's much more meaningful to different populations and allow people, essentially from the comfort of their phone or their living room to participate in the research that really matters to them. And I think that's sort of, again, a pretty big difference between what we're doing and the sort of standard sort of medical research.
Robert, this question's for you and kind of goes along with what you were saying. What is 23andMe doing to include underrepresented minorities in its research programs?
So, most of that will be more Altovise. We have to develop a product that's compelling, right? So people have to come and say, this is something that I want to purchase and I want to be involved in. We have to develop research themes that are appropriate to different communities and to the needs of those communities. And we have to demonstrate that we are both able to collect data and return results that are helpful to people. And then, as I said, sort of make it something that's reasonably straightforward for them to participate in.
We also have, and correct me if I get the name of it wrong, but we have our research collaborations program. And this is where there are investigators who are working with underrepresented populations, and they can partner with us to help discover genetic insights, research insights. So I think that's key, and that's also a way that we're getting more populations involved and represented in research as well. We're going out, working with those individuals who already have that connection solidified with those various groups. And overall, I think it's going to benefit society as a whole.
And I'd say it's one of those things, it's a continuous effort of actually making sure, because the way we can, the work that we can do, and then how it trickles down into, the drug therapeutic side, or it trickles down then into the product side. We're cognizant of all of it, and the reality is it just also takes some time for us to go after, and again, for people who are in that relevant field, who have communities, we're always out there looking for additional partners. So if there's people out there, we're always looking for opportunities to work with more populations and more groups.
This is for anyone. Why is there more genetic diversity in African populations than anywhere else?
Oh, you take it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my response to this question is that is where the human population really started, where it really originated. So more than 200,000 years ago, mankind started in Africa, and we know that there were subsets of individuals, subsets of populations that broke off from this larger population and migrated across the globe. But when everyone was confined to the continent of Africa, there was a lot of genetic diversity within that space. And as those subsets broke off, then there was a smaller amount of DNA that went on to really generate some of the other populations or ethnic groups that we have today. So that's really why the majority of genetic variation still resides within the continent of Africa today.
I think that's one of the coolest stories. It was one of the things I remember, when Joanna Mountain was teaching me some of these things, that, essentially the European population came from a small subset from Africa and evolved in this amazing way. And I think that's where I always love saying every mutation has a story, right, of why did you develop, blonde, why did you develop, blue eyes and very, fair skin, and you were more sensitive to sun. There's some of the basics, all of this came because people have optimized to survive in different parts of the world, but we all started in this one spot, and it's a tiny little subset that went north and evolved. And I just I always love, to me, the diversity. That's where also we think a lot about research that we can do in Africa, because it's this treasure trove. You have all the diversity. It's so amazing. I feel that's where you're going to be incredible untapped potential for making discoveries about humans and our potential and what we could do. So anyways, it's one of my favorite aspects about genetics is understanding what all the potential is of the human race. And that's one small group went north, and look what happened.
Right.
Awesome. If I'm a minority and if I'm a minority, is there less relevant information for me within the product? Why should I still participate?
So that's a really good question. There are certain health reports within our product that we know are more relevant to certain ethnic populations than others. However, I would encourage individuals from all populations to really get involved in the 23andMe experience, because you can find out information about your ancestral composition. You can find out information about your health makeup. So are you a carrier for a particular condition, or do you carry a variant that might actually increase your risk for a condition? We also have the option for people to get involved and engage in research, and also to even identify your relatives within our DNA database. So I think that we offer a lot to everyone, regardless of what population, what ethnicity you come from. And one thing that I really like about our product is that we provide individuals the option to choose which components they want to get involved in and engaged in. I'm a huge fan of research, getting involved in research. And as a minority, I strongly believe that the way that people who look like me will be represented in research is if we do get involved on the front end, and if we do provide that feedback in terms of how did this research experience how did it make you feel? That type of feedback can be helpful for researchers, because in some instances we can modify our studies to increase our outreach efforts and ensure that people are represented equitably.
That's a perfect segue into my next question. Robert, we'll start with you. What is your personal motivation for contributing to these types of efforts?
Oh, it's largely around the unmet medical need issue that you don't have to have, a very broad set of friends or family. You don't have to have a gigantic family to realize just how many diseases are out there. And for some of them, we have therapeutics that work reasonably effectively, and for others, we have therapeutics or treatment modalities that are not that effective, and for some there's just no treatments whatsoever. And I firmly believe that human genetics gives us opportunity to study a whole bunch of diseases, to get at the mechanisms that cause those diseases, and hence to be able to think about developing therapeutics. And so for me, the big motivator is really to try to help understand how the human genome, variation in it causes disease, and how we can use that to find therapeutics that will help alleviate that disease, and amplifying what we've all been talking about. And that's not just in Europeans. We've studied Europeans a lot, but there's a lot of other diversity. And if to a little bit on the previous question, it'll never change if people don't get involved, right? We can't, so there's no sort of special place where we can go and look up some sort of set of things of here's all the variation in Africa and here are all the diseases. The only chance we have is to have Africans and African Americans and others engage in research, participate, tell us what's wrong with them, understand how that's caused, and hopefully between us and other scientists be able to start mapping out what are the big disease-causing genes and how do we start to assess the impact of those and help people prevent disease.
Great.
Anne, what about you? Personal motivation for contributing to
research? I've always been a very curious person, and I've always been like, it really bothers me when I can't get an answer to something. So I'm very stubborn in that way. And so I feel like I'm constantly left with questions as to like why about health and the body, and like why things are the way they are. And the thing that I love about the platform that we've built is that it is, I have a certain set of questions. Like, for instance, I brought it up before, like, I have no cavities and I'm very proud. But like, why do I have no cavities? And then I was with, our head of marketing the other day, and she wanted to fly to Arizona when it was 130 degrees. And I was like, are you crazy? And she's like, I just love it. I just love heat. And that's when I was like, okay, Robert, we need to put in a question about heat. Like, what was wrong with our head of marketing? What's her genetic variation? And I feel like I look around the world, and also for me, one of the things I love is how different everyone is. Mm-hmm. Like I think it's so, like, I look at my two kids and I'm like, you're so different, yet you're genetically similar. Like, it's so interesting to me how small changes can lead to such different outcomes. And so the only way we're going to learn, it was like one of the hypotheses of this company is like the only way you're going to really understand the spectacular diversity and how this all came about is with like a huge number of people who all come together and say, well, we're all going to be part of it. And, we're all going to be part of this solution. And I think the challenge we have sometimes in academia and with a pharma company is it's kind of reflective just of that person of like, okay, it's the pharma companies, they have their mission and the academic has their mission. And I wanted to kind of democratize the platform to say, well, we all got questions. Like, we should all be able to answer questions, and do research in a way that scales. And, one of my favorites is the chocolate ice cream, vanilla ice cream, genetic association we found. It's not an NIH grant worthy kind of association, but it's so interesting. It is. And so we've created this way to make discoveries really easily. And for me, I feel like there's a responsibility I have to humanity as like a citizen of this planet to pass on something better to the next generation and just contribute to the body of knowledge. And the way that I can do that now is through a lot of research. So it's fun.
Okay, this is our last question, and it's for each of you.
Mm-hmm.
So what is either your favorite research study or piece of research insight that 23andMe has done? Is it the ice cream one for you?
Well, I always love the ice cream one. I like the like really strange stuff. Will you start?
I like the fact that over the past decade, we really have worked extremely hard to ensure that we have representation from people from various ethnic populations. So stemming back to our Roots into the Future project and our Africa Genetics Project. I just really love that we've been able to motivate a lot of people to get involved and to see the relevance and really to engage and get their trust in us as a company, so that we could provide them better products that are more meaningful as it pertains to their ancestry composition and their health reports. So I just love the various initiatives that we've been involved in overall.
I think my favorite one is the depression study we did. I think it's really an amazing study where we're showing that if you get a big enough group of people with enough genotypes, you can start to get variation in the human genome that associates with risk for depression. And part of why I like it, so most of the stuff that we do on disease, you know, the in some sense really sad thing about it is that I can tell you that, you know, if you exercise more and eat more green vegetables, that's a good thing, and that's probably a good thing no matter what. But for things like depression, we don't have that necessarily the exercise and the green vegetables, and you know, maybe there is something like that out there. Maybe people on one spectrum would be better off looking at, you know, pictures that make them happy or doing things once a day that makes them happy. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to both get risk for mental health issues and then to start to think about therapies that are not necessarily drugs but real behavior changes that will help people with that kind of disease, which I think is super challenging.
Mm-hmm. So my favorite paper is always one of our first. It's the efficient replication of 170 genetic findings. And I love that paper because one thing I always found really inefficient in healthcare or in research is that, you know, you do a study in schizophrenia and then we do a study in depression, and everyone has to go and set up their own groups. You have to go and recruit these people. You have to find them. It's incredibly expensive. And so we showed with this paper that we could just get a group of people and everyone has something. Like I said, there's no such thing as like a healthy person. Like everyone has something to report. And we could use this community of individuals and we could replicate 170 genetic findings all at once. And then we publish it all in this paper, this like mega paper. So if you did each one of those findings on its own, it would have been really expensive, you know, millions of NIH dollars. And here in one fell swoop, we could do it. So one of the things that we want to do is dramatically accelerate the pace of research. And I always love that paper because I felt like that was our first demonstration of like, we can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thanks to the three of you.
Thank you.
That was very
Yeah, thank
interesting.
you.
It was so much fun.
Yeah, it
Thank
was
you for
fun.
coming, you
Thank you
guys.
for having us.
Yeah, we're all done.
We're done.
Yay.